August 8, 1944. A narrow farm track on the edge of a wheat field, 3 miles south of Caen, Normandy, France. A Sherman tank sits motionless in the shadows of an orchard, its gun barrel extending so far beyond the standard hull that the vehicle looks structurally wrong. The gun is almost half as long as the tank itself. The breech has been rotated sideways to fit inside the turret. The co-driver's seat has been removed entirely and replaced with ammunition stowage. Where other Shermans carry 5 men, this one carries 4. It looks like a mistake. It looks like an engineering compromise that went too far. Trooper Joe Ekins is the most unlikely gunner in Normandy. He is 21 years old, trained as a radio operator with the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry, and he has fired the weapon he now sits behind exactly once in his life, on a practice range somewhere in England. He has never fired it in combat. 3 Tigers are moving through the wheat fields 800 yards away. One of them is Tiger 007. Its commander is the most decorated tank officer in the German armed forces, a man credited with the destruction of more Allied armour than any other single crew in the war, a man that German propaganda has elevated into a symbol of invincibility. He has never encountered a gun like the one aimed at him right now. In the next 12 minutes, 3 of those Tigers will be burning hulks in a French wheat field. The gun was called the Ordnance QF 17-pounder. It was the most powerful anti-tank weapon Britain ever put on wheels, and it was the only weapon in the entire Western Allied arsenal that could reliably kill a Tiger from the front at any practical combat range. To understand why the 17-pounder existed, you need to understand the crisis Britain faced in 1941. By the middle of that year, German armour had proven it could brush aside almost every anti-tank weapon the British Army possessed. The 2-pounder gun, adequate in 1939, was already useless against the heavier German tanks now appearing in the Western Desert. The 6-pounder was entering service, but its designers already knew it would not be sufficient for long. German engineers were not standing still. The Panzer IV was growing thicker. Heavier designs were coming. British planners could see the trajectory. In November 1940, work began on something far larger. By April 1941, a formal specification had been issued. The Army required a gun capable of penetrating 130 millimeters of steel plate at 1,000 meters. That was more than double what the 6-pounder could manage, and more than enough to defeat anything the Germans were known to be developing at that time. The result was the 17-pounder. Its caliber was 76.2 millimeters. Its barrel was 55 calibers long, stretching over 4 meters from breech to muzzle. The complete weapon weighed nearly 3 tons. A crew of 5 to 7 men were required to move it and serve it in action. The gun was formally approved for service on May 1st, 1942, but the weapon was ready before its purpose-built carriage was. By the winter of that year, German armour was pushing hard in the Western Desert, and Britain had nothing in the field to stop the heavier targets. Engineers made an emergency decision. They fitted 117-pounder barrels to the carriages of the older 25-pounder field gun, creating a hybrid weapon that crews called the Pheasant. The first of these improvised guns reached Tunisia in February 1943. Within weeks, they were destroying German armour at ranges that had been impossible before. The principle was proven. The fully developed gun arrived in Italy later that year. By D-Day, June 6th, 1944, it was deployed across multiple platforms in Normandy. Towed versions equipped Royal Artillery anti-tank regiments. The Achilles, a conversion of the American M10 tank destroyer, carried the gun on a tracked hull. Over 1,000 Achilles were built, and 124 were ready on D-Day alone. The Archer mounted the gun facing backwards on a Valentine chassis, a bizarre arrangement that forced the driver to vacate his seat before the gun could fire, but which gave the Royal Artillery a fast, mobile shoot-and-scoot platform that proved effective in the hedgerow fighting. The most important platform of all, however, was the Sherman Firefly. The Firefly began as a proposal that most people in authority refused to take seriously. The Sherman was the most widely used Allied vehicle in Europe, numerically dominant but technically inadequate against German armour at any significant range. Its standard 75mm gun could not reliably penetrate Tiger frontal armour at combat range. The American 76mm replacement was only marginally better. Against a Tiger at the front, the American gun required a range of 400 to 600 meters, well inside the kill zone of the Tiger's own 88mm gun. Major George Brighty and Lieutenant Colonel George Witheridge pushed the conversion against Ministry of Supply resistance. The engineering problem was severe. The 17-pounder's recoil travel was too long for a standard Sherman turret. An engineer named W.G.K. Kilbourne solved it by redesigning the recoil system entirely, placing the hydraulic cylinders on both sides of the gun, and rotating the breech 90 degrees to fit the available space. The co-driver position was eliminated, converted to hold ammunition. A new, slightly thicker mantlet was fitted. 77 rounds could be carried, though only 23 were immediately accessible to the loader during combat. Production of the Firefly began in January 1944. 342 were delivered before D-Day. Approximately 2,200 were ultimately built. Distribution gave each troop of 4 tanks exactly 1 Firefly. German tank crews were given specific orders to identify and eliminate Fireflies first in any engagement. Several Firefly commanders disguised their barrels with canvas wrapping or false paint schemes to avoid immediate identification. It was not vanity, it was survival. The gun's performance figures were decisive. Standard armor-piercing ammunition left the muzzle at approximately 884 meters per second. At 500 meters, it could punch through 163 millimeters of rolled homogeneous steel plate. At 1,000 meters, the penetration was still 150 millimeters. The Tiger's frontal armor was 100 millimeters thick. The 17-pounder could defeat it from 1,900 meters, a full 1,000 meters beyond the range at which the Tiger's own gun could reliably penetrate a Sherman in return. The arithmetic was not complicated. The Firefly could kill the Tiger before the Tiger could kill the Firefly. A specialized discarding sabot round was more capable still, reaching velocities of 1,200 meters per second, but its accuracy degraded at longer ranges, and it did not arrive in Normandy in meaningful quantities until late summer. The standard round was enough. It was more than enough. Now, before we get into the combat record and the engagement that ended the war for Germany's most celebrated tank commander, if you are finding value in this deep dive into British military engineering, hit subscribe. It takes a second, costs nothing, and it helps the channel continue producing work like this. The first major proof of the Firefly's value came on June 9th, 1944, 3 days after D-Day, near the village of Normandy. A single Firefly engaged 5 Panthers at approximately 1,000 meters and destroyed all 5 with 6 rounds. The engagement lasted minutes. The Panthers never identified the vehicle killing them before it was too late. At Langevre, a Sergeant Harris concealed his Firefly on the flank of an advancing panzer column and destroyed 5 Panthers with 5 consecutive shots before the German formation understood what was happening. At Rauray, a Sergeant Dring accounted for 4 kills in a single engagement, and his squadron destroyed 13 Panzer IVs, 1 Tiger, and 1 Panther for the loss of 2 of their own vehicles. A doctrine emerged from these engagements. The Firefly was not to be driven into frontal assaults. It was to be concealed, positioned to flank, fired, and then withdrawn into cover before the enemy could locate and return fire. 1 gun per troop, used properly, could change the outcome of an entire engagement. By August, German armoured commanders understood the threat precisely. SS Panzer units were briefed in detail on identifying the Firefly and removing it from the battlefield before it could act. The long barrel was the giveaway. Several crews found ways to shorten its visual signature. The Germans adapted. The British adapted further. It was, as it had always been, a competition between the man behind the gun and the man in the vehicle he was aiming at. On August 8th, 1944, Operation Totalize was underway. Anglo-Canadian forces had struck south of Caen through the night, aiming toward Falaise and the German operational rear. By dawn, the village of Saint-Aignan-de-Crémenil had been secured. Allied armour was consolidating the new line when, at approximately 12:30 in the afternoon, SS Oberfuhrer Kurt Meyer ordered a counterattack. Among the forces committed was a group of 7 Tigers from the heavy SS Panzer Battalion 101. One of them was Tiger 007, the battalion commander's vehicle. It carried 30 fewer shells than standard, owing to additional radio equipment fitted for command use. Its commander that morning was SS Hauptsturmführer Michael Wittmann. Wittmann's own vehicle, Tiger 205, was under repair. He was in an unfamiliar machine, commanding an attack across terrain he had not personally reconnoitred, against a defensive line whose exact composition was unknown to him. Witnesses later described him as uncharacteristically hesitant. His record stood at 138 tanks and 132 anti-tank guns destroyed. At Villers-Bocage, on June 13th, 1944, his single Tiger had destroyed roughly 14 Allied tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and 15 supporting vehicles in under 15 minutes, ending Operation Perch and forcing the British 7th Armoured Division into retreat. German propaganda had made him into a figure of myth. He rode into a wheat field on the northern edge of that myth that afternoon. In the tree line to the northeast, at the edge of a position called Delle de la Roque, Trooper Joe Ekins sat behind the gun of his Firefly. The crew had named it Velikier Luki, one of a squadron's Soviet city names. His tank commander, Sergeant Gordon, had spotted the Tigers moving through the wheat at 1,200 yards. He ordered Ekins to hold fire until they had closed to 800 yards and their side armour was exposed. At approximately 12:39, Sergeant Gordon gave the 39, Sergeant Gordon gave the order. Ekins chose the rearmost Tiger first. He fired. He fired again. Tiger 312 burst into flames. The Firefly reversed into cover. Sergeant Gordon was struck by the recoiling turret lid and knocked unconscious. The crew pulled him clear of the vehicle. Lieutenant James took command. Ekins reloaded. He traversed onto the next target. He fired one round into Tiger 007. The tank exploded. The turret was blown completely clear of the hull. All 5 crew members were killed instantly. Among them was Michael Wittmann. Ekins fired twice more at Tiger 314, commanded by SS Untersturmführer Irion. It was destroyed. 3 Tigers, 5 rounds, 12 minutes. Later that afternoon, Ekins destroyed a Panzer IV before his own Firefly was hit and disabled. The crew bailed out. He was reassigned as a radio operator and never fired the 17-pounder in combat again. He returned to Rushden after the war, put himself through night school and became a factory manager. He rarely spoke of August 8th for decades. He learned that one of the men he had killed was Michael Wittmann 8 years after the fact. His recorded words, held now in the Imperial War Museum collection, were these: "He was an ace, but he wasn't too clever that morning." There is a genuine dispute about the fatal round. Researcher Brian Reed argued in his 2005 study that the physical evidence, specifically the penetration point on Tiger 007's hull, is more consistent with the position of a squadron of the Sherbrooke Fusiliers to the west than with Ekins' position to the northeast. German eyewitness accounts describe the fatal shell arriving from the right, which from the German perspective pointed toward the Canadian line. The Sherbrooke Fusiliers' war diary was destroyed when their headquarters vehicle was hit by a stray American bomb, leaving no documentary counterweight to the British war diary that records turret numbers 312, 007 and 314 against Ekins' name. The question has not been resolved, and it may never be resolved with certainty. What is not disputed is the weapon. Whether the round came from Ekins or from a Sherbrooke Fusilier, it was a 17-pounder shell that killed Michael Wittmann. The gun is the historical fact. The crew is the historical argument. On paper, the American approach to the same problem looked more efficient. Fast, lightly armoured tank destroyers, built to hunt German armour with mobility rather than brute penetration. The M18 Hellcat was faster than nearly anything on the battlefield. American doctrine trusted speed to create the flanking angles that direct firepower could not achieve. In practice, the 17-pounder made the argument for penetration absolute and final. Against a Tiger, speed was worthless if the gun could not pierce the armour at any achievable range. The American 76mm gun required 400 metres or less against Tiger frontal steel. A Tiger crew that identified a Hellcat at 600 metres was in no danger at all. A Tiger crew that identified a Firefly at the same range was already dead, or close to it. The Soviet 85mm gun in the T-3485 was a capable weapon, better than the American 76, but it still required ranges under 1,000 metres to reliably penetrate a Tiger from the front. The 17-pounder had extended the operational killing distance to 1,900 metres. It had nearly doubled the range at which the equation reversed, the range at which the Tiger went from predator to prey. Approximately 15,000 towed 17-pounders were produced during the war, 2,200 Fireflies, over 1,000 Achilles, 655 Archers. The gun was adopted after the war by Britain, Canada, Australia, South Africa, Jordan, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Israel and Burma. Australian crews used it in Korea. It remained in active service with several nations into the 1970s. The Centurion tank, designed around the 17-pounder as its primary armament, became the dominant British tank of the post-war era. The gun outlasted the war it was built to win. August 8, 1944, a wheat field outside Saint-Aignan-de-Craménil, a 21-year-old radio operator behind a gun he had fired once. The gun was too heavy for rapid redeployment. The turret it was fitted into belonged to another nation's tank. The discarding sabot round that made it truly exceptional arrived in useful numbers too late for the main Normandy battles. There was never one Firefly for every tank that needed one. Distribution was always one per troop, always stretched, always inadequate against the scale of German armour that summer, and yet it worked. It worked at Normandy-en-Bessin, when 5 Panthers charged a single concealed Firefly and none returned. It worked at Langèvre, when a flanking gun destroyed a column before the column knew it was under fire. It worked in Tunisia in February 1943 when improvised Pheasant hybrids stopped the last serious German armoured push of the North African campaign. It worked in a wheat field on August 8, 1944, when it ended the myth of the most decorated tank commander the German armed forces ever produced. The American answer to German armour was more tanks. The Soviet answer was more tanks. Faster. The British answer was a better gun, in the tank they already had, operated by the man who happened to be sitting behind it that morning. Joe Ekins was a leather clicker from a shoe factory in Rushden, Northamptonshire. He was 21 years old. He had fired the gun once. 3 Tigers, 5 rounds, 12 minutes. That is not luck.